it's proven that category leaders suck up the vast majority of economic benefit in their space. Something like 70 to 80% of the profits in that category go to the category leader.
Well, welcome to episode 3 of the Expert Series with Bailey Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome my partner in crime, Martyn Dawes.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
So, Martyn, we're going to be talking about category design today. So, your chosen subject for today is category design. Martyn, I know you've lived this, right? So, a great example is obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about Coffee Nation at some point today, but as well as, creating, the self-serve gourmet coffee as a category, you're also helping lots of other companies with category design. So I think that'll open up to others to understand this.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to start with a really simple question. It might not be simple for you to answer. Well,
let's see.
Yeah. So what actually is category design?
It's a great start question, Rob. So category design is about creating a space in people's minds that they didn't know existed until you put it there. Yeah. It's about solving a problem that either they didn't know existed or exists within plain view that people cannot see. So it's about creating something new in the world as opposed to starting with a product, which is where most entrepreneurs start and usually then fail.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And we start with product and then we're focused on incremental changes to the product, right? Or we focus on competition and we get blindsided by competition and yeah.
Exactly. So people usually start with a product, or fundamentally, most businesses start from a place of, I want to be better than, what already exists, or even I want to be different. I want to differentiate, which used to be sort of enough, but by default they're still trying to differentiate from something that already exists. And if you're playing in a game of things that already exist, then by default you're comparable with those things, and you're just trying to be better, as opposed to people get excited about what's new in the world, not what's better.
Well, so I spend a fair bit of time doing due diligence for investors as well, right? So one of those things that always comes up is people always talk about the total addressable market, right? So that in a way is a limiting. If you're looking at it from a product and a competition, then you talk about maybe excellence of execution, but total addressable market, really what we're talking about there is getting market share or share of wallet. But with category design, that changes everything, right?
100%. If you're going into an existing market, then by default you're going to fight. You're trying to swim upstream against what already exists. So some of that firepower that you're deploying to start with, or you're wasting on trying to dislodge incumbents, and by trying to be better or different to what already exists. There's an interesting point you make about investors, because actually new categories and companies that go on to be the category king, this is exactly what sophisticated investors look for. Yeah. And it's proven that category leaders suck up the vast majority of economic benefit in their space. Something like 70 to 80% of the profits in that category go to the category leader. So it's a massive incentive to play category design as opposed to, I want to be better or different to what exists already.
Okay, great. Exactly. We talk about differentiation, we talk about competition, we talk about execution. And product. Now I'm going to challenge you on this one because, to put it crudely, you made your money out of coffee, right? So hang on a minute, that's a commodity product, isn't it?
Yes, and that's a very good point. So, but I didn't start with the product. So, and this is where people make this classic mistake we were talking about earlier. They start with product as opposed to market. They talk about product market fit, but that's very sort of contemporary and smooth language for really saying, actually, do people want to buy what I'm selling, right? And it's all about push. Okay, get the category right. Start with category. Start with the market, and then it's about pull. Yeah. So when I started my business, I was trying to flog a cup of coffee to people in places where they didn't want to buy it, but the product was wrong, etc., etc. What I had correctly identified was tailwinds in society, developments of convenience retail, the emergence of coffee bar culture, etc. So that gave me an open door to push at. And then it was a market problem. Okay, it wasn't about the product. It was about actually how can I take people in a completely new direction, give them something that they don't even know they want. But actually, if I can get that right, then I can create a new norm, a new path in society. And that's exactly what happened. So it wasn't about the coffee per se. It was actually about legitimizing people's ability to buy a cup of coffee from an unmanned coffee bar. Even more upstream than that was about saying, hang on a minute, you don't need to go to a coffee bar. We're going to come to you wherever you are. So our tagline was putting great coffee wherever you are 24/7. Yeah. So it was a human connection. It was making it was and I remember actually a customer saying, when the first customer actually emailed us and said, "You make my life better." There you go. What the hell's that got to do with coffee? you know?
I love it. So, to use an old-fashioned term from this old product manager, you're still defining a value proposition. You're still looking at, a problem. You're still looking at a solution. You're looking at an outcome and, benefit for the customer and the convenience, etc. But you've done it by, spotting a category potential, right? A new category that you can own. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, we were first into, it's tough. It's extremely difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But I finding that space, and the space effectively was, on the one hand, you've got traditional vending machines, poor quality product. People consider them a distress purchase, if you like. Office coffee vending machines it's a butt of office jokes. On the other hand, you've then got high street coffee bars, which are great product, premium product. Some degree of experience, etc. But you've got labour, real estate, etc. Yeah, and so and this wasn't on day one, but obviously what became visible over time was I was actually creating a third space in the middle, which was the convenience of vending, but the product quality of a coffee bar. Yeah, and then it was all about education, because category design is actually about identifying the problem and then marketing the problem, and amplifying that problem so people understand it. And then when people understand it, you then become the natural solution to their problem. Yeah. So it's not about selling your brand, or your product. It's about talking about the problem that exists and we can solve it.
So I'd like to focus on that, identify the problem, because, in the past I've done things like market research and, focus groups, et cetera, but you do tend to do what you said earlier. You're pushing and then seeing what you think about this. So I'd really be interested in understanding, how do you spot these category potentials? How do you spot these problems that, as a consumer, for example, I never knew I had? How do you find that pull?
You can get that insight from all sorts of places. There's traditional market research. I remember having a proposal from a very respected retail market research company, and I had limited startup funds. And I remember, they were going to go out to all sorts of locations like, drugstores, convenience stores, petrol stations, etc., and ask people, would you buy a takeaway cup of coffee? And I was just about to sign the deal and get them to do this work. And then I thought, you know what? What a complete waste of time. Because anybody can only say, well, I don't know. I might do, I might not. It's just because actually you're going on a journey, and your category design is about making a leap into a future that does not yet exist. And that is all about insight. And that insight can come from all sorts of places. For me, it was seeing, it was a trip to the US. I saw takeaway coffee in a very different format in 7-Elevens in New York. And it was that I then pieced together with sort of, food on the move, and takeaway food was starting to take off in the UK. Sainsbury's and Tesco were opening their express formats, etc. So convenience retailing. So it was all these little insights and signals that I pieced together, and then lots of experimentation. And the idea there is, you've got to get to the proof points before you run out of money, basically.
Yeah.
So
talk me through proof points. I'm interested in that because you just mentioned some supermarkets, etc. Is it like the tasting? As you say, you walk into the convenience store and actually someone hands you a lovely cup of coffee. You're going to react quite differently to someone with a questionnaire.
Yeah, and that was when we got to that point, that was all part of the education process. And category creation is a lot about education. It is relentless. It is non-stop. It's about showing people a different way. For me, the proof points were in the very early days when it was, an instant cup of coffee in corner shops in the UK, and then sort of neighbourhood convenience retailers. Maybe 40 or 50 cups a week were being sold. So I was never going to make a profit or light up the world with that. But I'd at least got some evidence that people were willing to give this a go. It was when I'd made the leap to real espresso, fresh beans, fresh milk, etc., and the sales really took off then. Yeah. And at that point, I thought, wow, I'm really onto something here. Yeah. So, and that was from there I could then go on to raise seed capital and develop the concept further. So,
So I want to bring in, in terms of my experience for the last couple of decades in tech, and more in technology areas, and listening to you speak today, what comes to mind is we will do things like user experience testing, right? We'll also have, in tech, people will come and say, I want to build an XYZ. We tend to look at things like storyboarding. So what's your current workflow? Where are the pain points? Where are the frustrations? Where are perhaps things that are might be obvious in hindsight when you make a suggestion, but it could be the fact that people are using lots of disparate systems rather than one system. So they don't say that they have a problem that needs to be dealt with. But if you then ask someone, how do they achieve, I don't know, how do they do their accounts each month, or whatever it might be? And then you look at the different systems they're using, and then you can start designing solutions around that. And you can maybe go back to them and say, we've identified one of the problems is you're spending a lot of time doing manual work, for example.
Yeah. You've got to show people a different way. And I don't think it can be, you talked about an abstract, and I think it's, product differentiation and technical features and benefits. More features and more benefits is not usually the answer.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of, early stage businesses get into trouble. So at the moment, I'm working with helping the founder of a company that have raised 20-30 million pounds of early stage funding, and and they're in this sort of cycle of it should work. This product, it should work, but they're going up against entrenched incumbents in their space. And they are playing very much the more features and more benefits game, but really you're trying to force people to switch from what they're already happy with, and that's a very expensive game to play.
So they're still playing the product market fit game, right? They're adding more features, they're adding more benefit messages, but they're not doing this category clarity, perhaps could be a term.
You've got to frame, name, claim your space.
Okay.
And it's difficult to wean people off that traditional thinking of, trying to sell more or make more, incremental improvements. Category design is about a big bang, completely starting with a blank sheet of paper, not incremental improvements. So yeah.
I love it. You frame, name, and claim the space, right? So let's think about that for a moment. So could you give me some examples, say other industry, other companies out there, or, other offerings out there that you would say are kind of like a category we could define,
Well, I
an
mean, if you
example? Yeah.
yeah, if you take a recent example, also in food and beverage, so Huel, yeah, meal replacement drinks.
Yeah.
They created that space, they defined it.
Hmm.
So in terms of beautiful category thinking, you actually create your point of view, yeah, and that point of view is a strongly worded, highly opinionated view of a small piece of the world, yeah, and you double down on that, and you're relentless, and you're not communicating with people. You're amplifying this on whatever stage
Mm.
is available to you. And so they created this entire meal replacement category, yeah, and double down on that. And then it was about distribution, and they were bought recently by, I think, Danone for €1 billion. Yeah, so that's the power of category creation.
And that was a new problem, right? The new problem was what people are taking their Ozempic and Manjaro or whatever it is, and then they're not getting their correct nutrition.
Well,
Or,
it was.
or was
I think
that, or was that they fell
it
into that?
predated. It predated that.
Did it? Mm.
Yeah, it was more around. I think it's about 10. The company's about 10 years old, and it was, it was in parallel with protein shakes, etc., etc. But it's a meal in a bottle. Yeah, and if you
Yeah.
look at it, likewise, Airbnb, for example, that took 6 years to become, and what it is today, which is about, well, I can belong anywhere. So categories are often they create an emotional construct and connection with the customer, which in hindsight appears obvious, but up front,
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and that goes hand in hand with what you're saying in terms of it's not easy, and there's a lot of education
yes, absolutely,
behind
and
it.
you've got to be willing to experiment a lot and go through multiple cycles. So yeah, Airbnb, Uber is, Uber is not a better taxi.
Yeah. So
Uber is about actually, how do
yeah,
people move around cities? And they created an entirely new ecosystem, the little moving map with a car seeing where it is, etc.
yeah,
That's now the de facto standard. Yeah,
yeah, and they're focusing on a mobility problem or whatever, or resource
100%.
problem, whatever it is, not a product, and they're focusing on reframing rather than rebranding.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah,
this is the other thing that companies move into an existing space,
yeah.
think it's about the product, and then it's all about their brand. Nobody gives a monkeys about your product or your brand. It's what can you do for me? What is the shift? Where do you take me? What problem are you solving for me? Or how are you making my life better in a way that I couldn't previously imagine?
So the company that you said you're helping at the moment, 20, 30 million turnover, early stage business, it sounds like they're still trying to take the incumbents on directly. So how do you get them to kind of like, I don't know if the word's disrupt. It's probably not disrupt, that falling into the old risk area again. More, how do they transform, you know?
They're really going back. They've really got to go back to the drawing board
Mm.
because it's a classic situation. They're burning through cash, and they're just not getting the stickiness of customers,
Yeah.
of clients. So these principles can be applied to companies at any stage. Clearly, it's if you can start from this place, then you're not trying to turn an oil tanker later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not easy.
I think when we were sharing some notes before we are preparing to do today, I think one of the lines you gave me is like sort of in a way that people don't really care about the brand, but they do want you to solve their problem, right? So if these guys are competing with incumbents, as long as they're coming up with a way to solve someone's problem, I guess it's then making sure they've still got enough of a treasury left to to get out there and let people know about it, right?
Yeah. It's a tough one that they're facing. So because they are very much it's all about the product. And there's so much noise
Yeah.
these days that actually to get noticed and to gain that traction.
Well, that's an early stage business. Probably startups, same thing. Great thing with a startup, they don't have to turn the oil tanker. They can be lean and agile. But what if I'm a big oil tanker? What if I'm a really big incumbent, big corporate organization? Is category design for me?
Yeah, it's all still about the same fundamental point. What is the change in society that we can bring? What is the big problem that we can solve? And look at the trends in society. Where can we play that is uncontested space? As opposed to competing with what already exists.
And I think the work that you did, back in the day, as such, with Coffee Nation, is you virtually had no competitors at that point, right?
Yeah. So really, this brings up a number of other things. So we were able to get those proof points early. Then it was about educating the customer relentlessly, and it was also about actually learning our space. And it was a very tiny amount of tiny sort of space, both physically but also metaphorically. So the thinking was, we're going to own this space. We're going to know it better than anybody else in the world. And really, the message to major retailers was that, look, this is going to happen. Whether it's with me and Coffee Nation or somebody else, don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
So I disconnected the category opportunity from my own business. And so it wasn't about selling Coffee Nation when Coffee Nation was me and the cat sort of thing,
Mm.
It was about the market opportunity. Yeah. And then there were other elements then. So for example, the business model, that was the business model really unlocked the opportunity.
Yeah.
Because that enabled the retailer to come in and play in the space without having to invest a lot of their own money. And then we owned the whole operating system. So we made it easy as well for them to say, yes, let's give this a go. And then we looked after the whole thing.
Well, that's brilliant.
So often it can be, it's the combination of product, category, market, and then the whole business model wrapped around it.
And I think that's the commercial value in what you're doing, right? When you own those things, then that's going to make a massive difference for getting investment, exit, attracting talent to come and work with you, all the rest of it. Yep.
100%. It creates an economic flywheel.
Yeah.
And a motor competitive advantage. And it's very difficult then for other companies to come in and catch up. So we had food businesses, Rob, like Kraft and Nestle, that then wanted to muscle in on the space. But of course, they're grocery brands.
Yeah.
That we were a small team of people, sort of a skunk works type of movement that were focused just on this one tiny space. And also, then the consumer rejected when those other companies tried to come into our space, because they said, no, you're trying to copy the genuine, authentic, Coffee Nation in this space. And consumers smell authenticity as well.
Yeah. Again, that's part of the pull argument, I think, from you as well, then, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting. If I look back at companies in hindsight, I thought that's not going to work, and then it did. And one example, you talked about, obviously, Coffee Nation, talked about Airbnb, but one example is a colleague of mine went on to a former colleague of mine went on to be the CEO of Innocent Drinks after they actually got themselves a bit established. But I remember when Innocent came out, the marketing director I was working with at the time was like, "Oh, this is amazing! I love their messaging and all the rest of it." And I was like, "Yeah, it looks a bit tree huggy, whatever, And I was a bit cynical, thinking, why would anyone want to invest or trying to get into this market? It might be a massive market, but it's just another fruit juice." Yeah. And how wrong I was.
100%. But you know what? That classic category, and I know the guys from Innocent, and we were sort of developing at the same time. But that illustrates a very important point you raised earlier, that it's not a product play, yeah, and it's not a brand play. It's an entire market play, And what they did was neatly say, hey, you can get one of your 5 a day, super easy, super convenient. Yes, the irreverent marketing and the brand and the playfulness and all the rest of it. That was the wrapper, right?
Yeah.
That was what went around it, right? The point was actually this was about delivering health in a bottle, convenience, etc., etc. And not a product. It wasn't being another fruit juice. It wasn't about competing with what already exists. But interestingly, like most category creators, they went through a really challenging time to actually get noticed and get understood and raise funding. I think they went out to something like 500 VCs and banks and so on and so forth, and obviously had a lot of rejection, as did we. So it takes an awful lot of persistence. And every legendary business starts off as a dumb idea
Yeah.
until it isn't.
But isn't it funny? It's like one of the things with category design, you kind of think about what are this is, I've spotted a problem. I'm going to, here's the new solution I'm going to go out with, and I'm going to be the opposite of what's out there at the moment. But in the case of someone like Innocent and dare I say it, maybe Coffee Nation and others as well, don't you end up getting bought by the incumbent of who you're trying to be the opposite of in the first place?
Yeah, that's a whole different subject. I mean, Innocent were ultimately bought by Coca-Cola. We almost exited Coca-Cola as well, interestingly. And of course, Coffee Nation was ultimately sold to Whitbread, became Costa Express, and then was ultimately bought by Coca-Cola as well.
Yeah.
So, it's very interesting. But I think again, it's an interesting point there. It was a 12-year journey when I exited. And at that point, we'd served over 100 million customers. We had no direct organised competitor. And so, we'd moved fast. And that was just really the foothills of growth, to be honest. Building categories is a multi-decade game, but get it right. And, as you said, you attract the right money, you attract the right team members, it automatically rejects, people that don't fit. Product, brand, culture, all line up behind what do we exist? What are we about? What change are we bringing in the world to the world and to people? So it's for me, it's like I can't imagine another way of building a business because it's get it right and it's so much fun.
Well, Martyn, I hope you continue to inspire people around this with your stories, and that we see more ideas that would seem maybe absurd to the big incumbents, but to the consumer, they're just like, that's what I've always wanted. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Because you're trying to project your thinking. You're standing in the future and looking back and inviting people to join you in a future that doesn't yet exist. And that, of course, is difficult thinking for, CEO, corporate, leadership teams, etc., to operate in that way. But we can help.
Well, I hope we're going to come up with, we'll continue to support companies to come up with application of category design and, creating demand from, I wouldn't say from thin air, but new demand rather than just, competing in the same addressable market each time and the same product feature race, etc. And it's been great talking to you. And if there's any last things you'd like to say or any last words of wisdom?
Play a bigger game. I think, it's most people start in existing markets and they see something and, they're jumping on a bandwagon that already exists. And it takes real courage. It is not for the faint-hearted. But if you could start from a place of, where can we take people? How do we take people in a new direction with something that doesn't yet exist? Then you can really change the world and build something fantastic. So
wonderful, thank you, Martyn. So to everyone watching or listening to this, we're all out there as businesses trying to compete better all the time, and maybe shift that thinking to being a category creator and go and mix things up, change that game entirely. And if you want to learn more about this, then please reach out to Martyn directly through me if you know me, or to Martyn directly, and we'll put some links. And we're also going to share a short white paper. So if you want to recap on some of the points we made today, we'll have that in the link in the comments.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Martyn.
Thank you.